Hello everyone, welcome to the Age Group Triathlon Podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and this week's episode is part 2 in a 3-part series looking at strength training for triathlon. In this week's episode, we're going to look at what I call the nuts and bolts of strength training. Because if you've ever stepped into a gym or looked into any kind of weights, you will no doubt have felt, well, we're triathletes, the gym isn't our natural environment. But you may have felt slightly overwhelmed by the jargon, the lingo, all the equipment, and just kind of thought, I don't know what's going on here. And it's an awful lot easier for us to shut down in this situation and go, this is overwhelming, there's far too much going on, I feel like an idiot, I'm pretty sure I look like an idiot. Everybody knows what they're doing except me. I'm going to find an excuse not to do this. I think this is a reason that a lot of triathletes sort of shun strength training. So what I want to do is I'm going to talk you through everything as if you've never stepped foot into a gym before, as if you don't even understand what the equipment is called. We're going to start right from the ground up, okay, with what I call the nuts and bolts of strength and conditioning. Now, the first thing, the number one thing people think of when they think of strength work is a gym. And I include myself in that statement. If I think about strength work, I think about going down to the local leisure centre, loading up a barbell, or, doing some exercise in that gym. But there is an awful lot that you can do without a gym. For a start, if you have a selection of kettlebells and dumbbells, you can actually achieve a surprising amount as triathletes with that, because we can perform an awful lot of mobility exercises, shoulder exercises, especially those sort of upper body, with a relatively limited selection of weights. And we can also include several lower body exercises, such as sort of lateral lunges and anything involving sort of different twisting motions, sort of core exercises, with a relatively limited selection of weights at home. In fact, there is one client who I provide one-to-one strength and conditioning coaching for, and he has a setup at home with a TRX suspension trainer, with kettlebells and dumbbells, and he has a gym as well. So for the midweek sessions, I set him sessions which are based simply using sort of lighter weights in the TRX trainer, and we have the gym sessions on the Sunday as well. So it's not either or, you can incorporate both. Now, a lot of this home workout equipment, if you're just looking to get a mat, a few dumbbells, kettlebells, maybe some resistance bands, it doesn't have to cost the earth at all. Especially if you start looking around in late January, early February, there are bargains to be had, my friends. However, it may be that you are going, I'm not even sure that's for me. In which case, we can actually do a surprising amount with body weight on its own. You don't need weights to be able to incorporate strength training into your routine. Now, if you have access to a resistance band, that opens up an enormous amount of possibilities. But even if you don't want that, even if you don't want to invest in a resistance band, if you're just feeling a little bit, anxious, about the whole thing, you're not sure if it's for you, we can do an awful lot without using any equipment whatsoever. And in fact, 3 of the plans in my Introduction Strength and Conditioning program are for body weight only. We can include lunges, we can include jumps, we can include lots of core exercises. Just for you off the top of my head, there's quite a lot that we can do. Of course, the famous push-up. There's quite a lot that we can do without any weights at all. And is it ideal? Well, probably not. There is, because only so much resistance that we can create with body weight. Yes, we can build ourselves up to the point that we're doing 30 press-ups in a row, but is that going to give us the same stimulus as doing 4 heavy reps of bench press? No, it's not. So there are some limitations, but still it's an awful lot better than doing nothing at all. If you decide that you do want to pick up some kit for a home gym setup, and I'm talking a really basic, gym is a strong word, a home strength workout setup, then I recommend a mat of some sort. It can be a yoga mat, it could even be a turbo training mat. If I'm doing a strength session or yoga, just me and my girlfriend, I'll give her the yoga mat and I'll just use my slightly sweaty turbo training mat, and that does the job just fine. It stops me from slipping and it protects my knees. You might want one of those. You would also be looking at, probably one kettlebell. I don't think you really need much more than one. You could go for a few if you want. If you think, look, I'm dedicated to doing some strength training, but I live far enough away from a gym, or I can't justify a gym, and I'm going to do all my strength training at home. Yeah, it might help to have a selection of these at home for you to use, but realistically, one kettlebell should be okay for most people. Dumbbells, we do need a little bit more sort of, what's the right word? Variety. Variety. It's not a hard word, Simon. A lot more variety, a lot more options when we're looking for our the weights. Because if we are doing exercises, especially those that involve the shoulders, such as a lateral raise, we are going to want dumbbells that might only be around about 2 kilos when we're starting out, okay? Because this is the kind of exercise that really builds up a burn after only a handful of reps, and we don't want to run the risk of injuring ourselves. However, if we also want to be doing a dumbbell squat or a dumbbell deadlift, we're going to need some significantly heavier weights there to be able to handle that. So some modular dumbbells. Now there are the ones that I've got, they literally, it's a relatively simple home workout setup I've got. They're dumbbells that almost work like mini barbells. We'll touch on this if you don't know what I mean later. But and I attach individual weights to them, and then I fix them in place. With a sort of a stopper on the end, the safety, so that I can then sort of add and remove plates from these dumbbells as I need to. But there are also all sorts of fancy systems out there that you can use, some of which can be sort of quite expensive, but they can actually be really modular. You can get quite a lot of weight on them. So yes, you might be looking at about £50. £80 maybe for some of these dumbbells. I wouldn't recommend buying them straight away, but there is an awful lot that you can do to be able to add weight at home without needing to go into a gym. As mentioned earlier, a TRX suspension trainer is a great way of being able to incorporate some body weight training at home with this piece of equipment. However, you do need a mounting point. You do need something to affix the trainer to, which can be a bit of a sticking point for some people, because that may involve sort of sticking something either into the ceiling. In some cases, I think a lot of people will sort of fit them around sort of door frames, clamps, things like that. I don't feel qualified to be able to recommend the correct mounting areas and points for TRX trainers. It's not something I know a wealth about. I use them myself at the gym, but I've never installed one at home. So make sure you do your research before you look into that. So with that in mind, if you do decide either that there's a gym near you that you can join and you also get unlimited access to the pool, that makes a lot of sense financially and logistically for triathletes. You could include strength and swimming in one visit. It may just make a lot more sense economically. You think, well, I can pay sort of £7 a swim at the local leisure centre, or I can pay £50 a month for this local gym that has a 25-metre pool in it, and that way I end up saving myself money. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You then have to decide what kind of gym it is that you're looking to join. But before we do that, I'm going to look into some of the basic equipment so you can understand the bits of equipment I'm referring to and whether they, would be worthy of your consideration when you're deciding which gym to join. First one I'm going to touch on is dumbbells. And these are really sort of the quintessential piece of strength equipment. If you think of a bodybuilder grinding out bicep curls, he's probably holding a dumbbell in his hand. And for most people, myself excluded in this situation, for most people, dumbbells, they will be sort of just wide enough for you to hold with one hand, but wouldn't have much more space than that, simply for one hand. And they will have plates that will be welded onto the end. Okay, and each dumbbell will have on the side of it written what weight they are, and these will generally go sometimes in some cases go all the way from about half a kilo, maybe even less in some cases, all the way up to around about, I've seen some dumbbells at around about 70 kilos, 75 kilos. So there's an enormous range of these, and this is something you get at a gym that you just can't get at home, which is this variety, because they have a huge space. They've got a big rack where they can have all of these different sizes of dumbbells for people to go over, pick up, do the exercise they want. And if they want to switch on to an exercise where they need more weight, or they simply want to add more weight in their next set, I'll cover progressing strength workouts next week. And then they can pick and choose which size dumbbell it is that they use. Now, often at a lot of gyms, they'll look at the really popular weights, so sort of around about 5 kilos to about 25 kilos. Sometimes they go up in 5 kilo jumps, sometimes 2.5, sometimes less. Again, it depends on, and it could even be pounds if you're over in the US. It depends on a number of factors. But these are the most common weights that people want to use, and some gyms will have two sets of 10s, 2 sets of 15s, 2 sets of 12.5, because of the demand. Because it can be a little bit of frustrating when you get to the gym and you get ready to do your dumbbell overhead press, go over to the dumbbell rack, and you find that somebody's already using the 10 kilogram weights that you're planning to use, and you've got to wait for them to finish. So a lot of gyms will have doubles. If you are going to a gym and you are taking dumbbells off of the rack to go and use them, when you return the weights, please put them back where they're supposed to be. It's a real bugbear of mine when you look at the weights and then go, okay, 2.5, 5, 7.5, 20, 12, 10, and you can see that that all sense of order has been lost as people have just gone, oh well, I can't put my weights down where they should be, so I'm just going to dump them on the closest available piece. It's very annoying for people, so just take the time, even if you have to rearrange the racks slightly, just make sure you put your weights back where they came from. Now, there are very few gyms out there without any dumbbells. The only gyms that I've seen that don't include any dumbbells are sort of the fitness suite at a budget gym, where it might be an exercise bike, a treadmill, maybe not a lot else, right? But nearly every gym that charges a membership, if not every gym that charges a membership, will have a really good selection of dumbbells. And these are really fantastic because they allow us to perform exercises unilaterally and bilaterally. Now, a bilateral exercise is one where you use both sides of your body at the same time. So it's something like a squat where you've got both feet on the floor, you drop down, you come back up. That is a bilateral exercise. A unilateral exercise is one where you're only using one leg. So that could be a single leg squat, for example. So dumbbells allow us to be able to perform these exercises because we can just hold one in our arm. It could be that we're doing, same with upper body exercises. If you're just doing a bicep curl with one arm at a time. That is, a very, popular exercise for bodybuilders. To be honest, I don't tend to give triathletes anything for building their biceps. It's not really a muscle group that, has a huge amount of benefit to us. In fact, of course, I will include exercises which will target the biceps in some way, form or another, sort of compound exercises where they target multiple muscle groups at once. But we don't tend to focus on the bicep as a muscle group. However, if somebody did want to, they could use dumbbells to focus on one arm at a time. And you can hold them above your head. You can hold them in your hands to provide more resistance to leg exercises. You can lift them. I say throw them. I don't want you to lob a dumbbell, but you can use them for explosive movements as well, such as a dumbbell snatch. There is a huge amount that you can do with dumbbells, and they are, a really, really good piece of equipment. The downside to dumbbells is that often, especially when it comes to lower body exercises, that the limiting factor becomes, rather than your leg's ability to lift the weight, it becomes your grip strength. So if you are doing a dumbbell squat and you're holding a pair of 30 kilo dumbbells in your hands, how long can you hold on to those for before you have to drop them onto the floor because you're worried about dropping them? So they do definitely have their limitations, but they're really good, especially if you're starting out, because they can be really nice and light. Okay, you don't have to run the risk of causing yourself injury as you would with some other heavier bits of equipment. The next piece of equipment I'm going to be looking at will be the kettlebell. And again, a lot of you are going to sort of know what these look like, but if you don't and you don't want to Google them, generally made of metal. They're sort of generally sort of quite circular with a flat base, so you can put them down, and they will have a handle protruding out the top of them that you can hold with one hand. And kettlebells are sort of a bit of a alternative to dumbbells in some respect, because the weight sort of hangs underneath the grip rather than sort of in parallel with your hand. It allows you to perform exercises that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. We have, for instance, a swinging action such as the kettlebell swing, and it's a lot easier to perform some more kind of explosive movements like snatches with a kettlebell than it is a dumbbell. Not to say that it can't be done with a dumbbell, but it is easier with a kettlebell. And I'm not an evangelical. Some people absolutely adore kettlebells. They're included in every single workout. And they are, they're a good sort of functional piece of equipment. I personally think that for triathletes, that the kettlebell, I don't want to say it's of limited use. That's not the what I want to look at all. But I do think there are other pieces of equipment that we need to look at as athletes that will help us to improve our strength. And I do think that some people, they err towards kettlebells because they have less of a stigma surrounding them relative to dumbbells. I think some people who go to the gym but definitely want to make it very clear they're not bodybuilders and they don't want to get bulky and look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, they might err towards kettlebells because they feel like a slightly sort of safer, friendlier option in some ways. Don't have that same level of sort of imposter syndrome. And kettlebells generally tend to be used without a bench. So they sort of be used in various sort of standing exercises. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with a kettlebell. You can also use them actually, a good use is because of the shape of the handle in most cases is that you can hold the dumbbell, sort of the outside of it, with two hands. So you can perform like kettlebell squats. If you're holding the weight with two hands, then it places less sort of load on your hands. It's less of a test of your grip strength than a dumbbell squat would be. So there's a definite place for them, there's a definite use for them. However, I think that as triathletes, there's not an enormous amount of exercises that I tend to set people with any great regularity. Again, depends on somebody's training age in the gym, how comfortable and familiar they are with equipment. We may go for things that are really advanced that use kettlebells. But I generally, with the vast majority of triathletes, I try to keep the strength training relatively simple. I'm not there to show off. I'm not there to try to, sort of be as complex and, sort of inventive as I can to broadcast my knowledge of strength and conditioning. I want to make sure the sessions are easy and simple to follow for people, and from that respect, yes, I will include kettlebells within somebody's training, but I won't include them as much as you might see in sort of some personal trainers and more sort of fitness focused people might include them. They don't tend to go as heavy as dumbbells either. But that's not to say that there's anything necessarily bad about that. Their application is sort of slightly different. People would describe them as being a more functional version of dumbbells. They associate dumbbells with bodybuilding, people looking to get big biceps and the like, but it's not the case. It's more of a preconception, and I think the reason that a lot of people gravitate towards kettlebells is so they don't feel like bodybuilders. Now, if you're looking to include sort of kettlebells in your training, I think it's a good thing to have at least access to if you're joining a gym. Then there will normally be a selection, but whereas you can expect to have a huge rack of dumbbells with, a good sort of 30, 40 different dumbbells to choose from, When it comes to kettlebells, the choice is often sort of significantly lower. It's significantly reduced, and the kettlebells will often be in higher demand than the dumbbells because they won't have as many of them. Again, this isn't a major issue. It's just something to be aware of. If you go to a gym and you're shying away from the dumbbells, you're not sure you feel confident going over to that part of the gym to use them, and you'd rather use the kettlebells, then just pay attention to how many is that they have, how many are on the shelf, how many people are using them, that kind of thing, just to give you an idea. Next piece of equipment I want to look at is the barbell. And this is, if you think about Olympic weightlifters who you see at the Olympics, when they're throwing those huge weights over their head, they are using barbells. And this is the best equipment for being able to add weight to any exercise that it is that you're doing. Now, most barbells that you see in a gym are men's competition barbells, and the bar itself is 20 kilograms. Okay, so this really is quite heavy just as we're getting started. Now, this is something that I sort of tell people, if you don't feel ready to use a barbell, then don't. If a plan says do a barbell back squat, but you don't feel ready, then do a goblet squat or a dumbbell squat instead. Don't rush into this and lift heavier sort of before you're ready, because if nothing else, your legs really aren't going to thank you the next day. So these barbells are 20 kilos and they are 2.2 meters long. Okay, so they're really quite chunky pieces of equipment. There are also a women's barbell which weighs in at 15 kilos and is just over 2 meters long. So the women's competition bar is, notably lighter and shorter than the men's. And if I'm doing Olympic lifting, so if I'm doing a snatch or clean and jerk, which are two sort of complex explosive movements that you see people doing at the Olympics, I will be using a women's competition bar because I only weigh 55 kilos. And if I'm practicing my form, because let's face it, I'm a triathlete, on the odd occasion that I decide to do some Olympic lifts, I'm not there looking to set any records, just looking to mix up my weight training a little bit. And as soon as I stick on a pair of 5 kilo plates, I'm throwing about twice my body weight over my head. That's a lot of weight. And there's no shame in using a women's bar. Equally, there is no shame in just using the bar on its own for any exercise. Now, for some exercises, it can be a little bit tricky if you don't have any plates at all that are on the bar, because the plates are what lift the bar off of the floor. So if we look at the deadlift, for instance, if the bar is all the way down on the floor, a lot of people might lack the mobility to reach down and be able to pick the bar up at the start and to be able to get it to a nice low position at the end of each rep. So they might consider a Romanian deadlift as an alternative in that situation. I go through sort of some exercises in a bit more detail next week, but it's very difficult to do over an audio format. And they might look at different variations, but for the most part, it is absolutely fine just to use the bar on its own with no weight. I guarantee, that there are going to be almost no one. I don't know, there might be one smart ass in some gyms, but broadly speaking, a lot of people, they're going to see somebody just bench pressing or squatting with the bar on its own. They go, oh, fair play, they're having to go with the barbell. They're not going to go, oh, look at him or her, what a weakling. Just lifting the bar, I can do that with all these extra plates on it. Even if somebody did think that, you wouldn't want anything to do with them, right? So don't be afraid to just use the bar, especially when you're learning. Don't try and be a hero. Don't run the risk of injury or having real muscle soreness the next day. We're triathletes. We need to do everything we can to reduce muscle soreness the day after a strength workout. Muscle soreness is not, generally speaking, a sign of a really good, useful workout. It just means you won't be able to run for the next couple of days. So we do need to be sort of mindful of this, but yeah, don't shy away from the barbell if you think that you're strong enough. It is definitely the top piece of equipment in the gym for me personally and for most triathletes. Because if we are looking at lighter weights, if we're doing sort of goblet squats, dumbbell squats, or deadlifts where we're using lighter weights, we're not necessarily again, it depends on the size of the dumbbell. We're not necessarily applying an awful lot more in the way of sort of stimulus to the muscle than we would do, say, from hill reps or from a paddle in the pool. Okay, it's only by lifting heavy. And again, I'm not saying, that we need to be going to the max, lifting like as much as we can. But the more weight that we can lift using a barbell to achieve this, the more stimulus we're going to get in our training, and the greater benefits is that we're going to get. And especially if we want to include a max strength block in your training, which again I'll be covering next week, you're definitely going to be wanting to use a barbell to help really load that up. And it's worth practicing these movement patterns with the barbell when you are simply using lighter weights. And for me, barbells are an absolute non-negotiable in the gym, and I want to see at least 3 or 4, ideally with a squat rack each, so that I know there's most of the time at least I'm going to be able to use that barbell, load it up with some weights, and get some training done. If you go to a gym and there's only one squat rack, that should be a little bit of a red flag, because chances are that's going to be in really, really high demand. And if I think about lots of exercises that might set triathletes, lunge, deadlift, squat, basic movement patterns, but important movement patterns, these are all going to require a squat rack. And if I'm unable to get a barbell onto a squat rack and load it up with enough weight for me to be able to get it on my shoulders easily to be able to squat it, I'm setting myself up for failure there, really. I'm not going to be able to get the training done that I want to. Because if you have a lightweight, if you're just using the barbell, you should be able to lift it up and put it on your shoulders, no problem whatsoever. But if we get to the point where we want to be squatting sort of 50, 60, 70 kilograms, chances are you're not going to be able to just whip that off the floor and stick it onto your shoulders, okay? You need a squat rack to help you get into that position, and so into that start position. And so they are a bit of an essential in a gym. And I personally, even if you're just starting out and you find the idea of this intimidating, you don't know where you're going to see yourself in 6 months or a year. So if there isn't a sort of some good sort of infrastructure for barbells at a gym, I really would think about looking elsewhere, unless it's the only option in your area. Another piece of equipment I really think is important for triathletes is a plyometric box. And these are special boxes which are sort of designed to absorb impacts. They're relatively soft in some ways, but they're still sort of quite heavy and quite sturdy, so you can jump onto them without worrying about them sort of being knocked out from underneath you. I mean, if I were to jump onto just sort of a light wooden box, there is a chance that if I get my landing wrong, that I could end up sort of flipping the box away from me and hurting myself quite badly. Plyometric boxes are designed to be very sturdy, quite heavy, and so if we are doing plyometric explosive exercises, if we're jumping onto these boxes, then we can do that safely. And that's really important, if you ask me, especially for our running. However, what I would say is that even if you are at a point where you're nowhere near doing any exercises like this, there is still a lot to be said for having these boxes, because we can use them if we are training people sort of with new movements. So if you take somebody and you sort of give them a standard bilateral back squat, okay, most people can do that. If you then are teaching somebody a single leg squat, that's a lot more difficult. And a lot of people will struggle to get low enough and to have the stability to be able to achieve this. So what can we do to help train this movement? Well, we get a box. We get a plyometric box that is around about sort of chair height for someone. We get them to sort of get ready for their single leg squat, drop down, their bum touches the box, so A, they know they've gone low enough, and B, they have that moment of stability. Again, don't sit down on it, but just sort of touch it so they can regain their balance and stand back up again. And this is a great way to train that single leg movement. And then over the weeks and months of doing this, somebody may feel confident enough to remove the box, and they can then use that movement pattern that they've learned to be able to achieve a single leg squat. Now, this isn't always going to be the case. It's not always as straightforward as that. Some people may never want to remove the box. Again, it depends on the individual. but it allows us to be able to perform an exercise that we might have been too sort of intimidated to try before. Oh, there's no way I could do that. But add in a box and suddenly it becomes an awful lot more achievable. And I'm just using the single leg squat as an example. There are plenty of other exercises that you can do with a box to help make them more achievable. Most boxes come in sets of 3. So you'll have a big box, a small box, and a medium box. And these you can normally stack on top of each other. They should hopefully have Velcro to help keep them together, which will help them go pretty much as high as you'd ever really want them to go. However, if you are just sort of starting out, if you're just getting used to doing sort of box jumps, then the small box may be all that you really need. Okay, it may not even come halfway up your shins. But I remember when I was coaching sort of ex of mine, coaching is a strong word. We went to the gym during COVID, and I remember I said to her, okay, let's do some jumps, and she was in perfectly sort of reasonable health, perfectly fit. I said, okay, jump onto that box, and she just kind of looks at me and goes, I can't do it. Even though it was a relatively low box, and it really took a lot of encouragement to get her to the point where we could build up the courage for her to achieve that jump. This jumping motion is something that a number of us will take for granted. I think it's a lot easier for runners, but for people just starting out, the idea of doing a jump can be sort of paralyzing. They just can't remember or think how it is they can get their body to move like that. And if somebody has spent, the last however many years sat behind a desk not doing anything, okay, I can understand that. I mean, for me, I really love doing box jumps. So it can be a little hard for me to wrap my head around, but that doesn't mean that what somebody is experiencing isn't legitimate. So I would absolutely recommend, if you are just starting out, just starting off with a small box and making sure that you have a good variety of these boxes when you look to join a gym. It will help give you flexibility and variety. And even if, say, you're coming back from an injury and you want to take it easy as you get back into doing box jumps, having a nice small box is quite important, as well as having a larger box for when you get more confident. There are also medicine balls and slam balls that a lot of gyms will have, and these are really great piece of equipment if you can get a gym that has them, because they allow us to perform more kind of explosive exercises with our upper body, which is quite important. If you look at the strength and conditioning programs for swimmers, a lot of them will involve throwing balls, slamming balls, hurling balls. Sometimes you're throwing them at the ground, sometimes you're throwing them up at the ceiling, sometimes you're throwing them at a personal trainer who stood there on the other side. Although I remember when I did do in-person personal training, I was coaching someone and I was saying, hey, throw the ball at me and I'll catch it, and she refused to because she's worried about hitting me in the face. But it really is, they are useful pieces of equipment, and beyond that kind of more explosive work that you can do with them, you also have the the ability to do Russian twists and different bits of core work with them as well. So I would recommend, I wouldn't say that they are anywhere near as vital as as good dumbbells and barbells. But I would say, that this should be something that is, relatively high on your list. The issue that you can get with some gyms is if they're really set up for bodybuilders, there may not be an awful lot in the way of other strength equipment at all. So you might not have slam balls, you might not have medicine balls, you might not have plyometric boxes. It could really be focused on machines, which I'll touch on in a bit. And free weights such as dumbbells and barbells. But I would say that for a lot of triathletes, including, or at least having access to medicine balls and slam balls is a really good idea. While we're on the subject of machines, I will touch on them. So a machine that you will see in just about every gym. You get classic machines such as your chest press, your leg extension, leg curls, the overhead press. There are some pretty standard machines out there that you'll see in just about every gym, leg press as well. And there is nothing wrong with using machines. I definitely don't want to come across as someone who is sort of gatekeeping strength and conditioning in the gym. However, for triathletes, most machines are of limited value. And the reason for this is that machines are designed, broadly speaking, for two types of people. On the one hand, you have people who want to get stronger, but they don't quite feel ready to lift free weights. They may feel sort of uncomfortable, self-conscious, they don't know what they're doing, and so they start with machines. And that's what I did when I first went into a gym. I thought, if I use a machine, there's only so much of an idiot I can make out of myself. However, it really is important. It's one of the reasons that I've created the Introduction to Strength and Conditioning program, is that, for people to understand exactly how to perform different free weights exercises. And the reason that I push people towards free weight exercises is that if we take, for example, the leg press, if you were to perform the leg press on a machine, that is almost exactly the same movement as a squat. And the downside of using the leg press is that we are not actually including any of the core stabilizing muscles that we would use if we were doing a sort of a squat. So because we are locked into that position, because we are simply pressing our legs up and down rather than using our core, our adductors, any muscles like that, we are limiting the benefit that we're getting. Would it allow us to lift more weight than we would free weights? Yes, absolutely. Most people would be able to leg press much more than they'd be able to back squat. But the reason for this is that because you are using more muscles during a squat, and it's a more unstable position to find yourself in. And again, there's nothing wrong with using the leg press machine if you're just starting out and you're feeling nervous and you don't feel ready for a squat. But I would say, rather than focus on, well, I want to get ready for squatting, so I'll spend lots of time on the leg press and then move on to the barbell back squat when I'm ready. Instead, focus on a bodyweight squat, maybe squat down onto a plyometric box and stand back up again. Get used to doing these squats, maybe add in some weight to make it a goblet squat, some dumbbells, and then move on to a barbell squat when you're ready. So to focus on the movement and learn how to perform the movement correctly instead of spending time on the machine. And this is the issue with the machines. They do lock you into this very static position where you're simply focusing on one muscle at a time. And this is brilliant if you're a bodybuilder. If you're a bodybuilder and you're simply looking to hit your triceps, if you're simply looking to hit your hamstrings, okay, if you're simply looking to hit your middle deltoid, these machines allow you to really focus in on specific muscle groups at a time, which is really fantastic. But we're not bodybuilders, okay? We're athletes, and we're trying to achieve more in the way of whole body training rather than just trying to get one muscle group as big as it possibly can be. However, there are exceptions to every rule, okay? And I do believe the assisted pull-up machine is a fantastic way for triathletes to develop their pull-ups. The reason is that this machine, it actually mimics the pull-up motion, but it simply gives you a little bit of assistance, a little bit of help. And this is a great way for people to actually learn how to perform a pull-up correctly and safely, but without there being that huge difficulty curve between going from a bent over barbell row to a pull-up. Okay, these are two very sort of different movements. So you can use the assisted pull-up machine to be able to help you learn to be able to sort of do these pull-ups, and you can start slowly reducing the weight that you have on the pull-up machine each week. And you know what? The pull-up machine is a sort of exception to just about every other machine, where the more weight that you add, the easier it is. Now, being 55 kilos, if I were to put 55 kilos of weight on the assisted pull-up machine, I'd be able to pull myself up effortlessly. If I then take 10 kilos off and remove it to 45 kilos, then reduce it to 45 kilos, sorry, then I will be able to still do it really easily. But once I get down to about 10 kilos on the machine, it's going to get a lot harder. And it's a great way for you to, if you can take off 2.5 kilos sort of every couple of weeks when you're practicing this, you will be able to build yourself up to a full body weight pull-up in time. Whereas if we focus much more on sort of other pulling exercises and then try to jump straight into a pull-up, then there's a good chance that we would fail because the motion is just so different. So there are exceptions, and the main exception, I believe, is the assisted pull-up machine, which can be useful for triathletes. Next piece of equipment that I'm going to touch on is the bench. Now, the bench is the opposite of the machine in many ways, because a weightlifting bench is for free weights exercises, whereas a machine is, not, it allows you to perform broadly the same exercises you'd be able to perform on a machine, but you're instead using them without any support on a bench. Now, benches, as triathletes, you don't spend quite as much time on benches as other people. I mean, the bench press is an exercise I don't tend to overprescribe to athletes, but we will include it in most people's programs. However, a lot of other movements which we would traditionally use the bench for, such as maybe a seated overhead press, I'd rather have my athletes standing for. Because again, we're athletes, we're trying to engage the core, we're trying to engage as many muscles as possible when we're doing a movement such as the overhead press. And so we're holding the barbell in our arms, we're pushing it above our head, bringing it down, and we're not just training our shoulders, we're also training all of the other muscles in our body that help support that movement. Whereas if we got a bench and we set it into sort of a seated position, the bench, you can sort of move them from flat to sort of turn them into something of a chair. If we were to sit there on the bench press and do this overhead press, we would get a better training effect on our shoulders. We'd be able to lift a bit more weight. However, it would be at the expense of overall strength and stability, which for me is, just as important to train as the shoulders themselves. I mean, as much as anything else, if you're lifting a weight above your head, the risk for injury is high. I'll be honest. A lot of bodybuilders who have shoulder injuries, this is from lifting weight over their head. And it's safe enough if you build it up safely and you don't try to be a hero. But if you are not ready, if you try to push, more weight than you're ready for above your head, you do run the risk of injury. Now, as we're swimmers, if we want to have good shoulder stability, if you think about how your hand enters the water right at the front end of the stroke, and you engage that catch and you start to pull the water towards you, we do need good stability in our shoulders. So we do need to include this exercise, but we do need to be very careful as we do so. There are other exercises that we use the bench for, such as a sort of a single arm row as another exercise off the top of my head. But we don't tend to use them in an enormous amount. That being said, if you go to a gym that you're thinking of joining, if they only have 2 or 3 benches and it seems to be quite busy, again, that's something that might be worth considering, that it could end up being, a real fight to get some benches. In fact, if you are looking to join a gym, I recommend, if possible, booking a appointment at the time that you'd normally train at. So you can head down, whether it would normally be about sort of like 6:30 in the morning, or whether it would be sort of in the evening, depending on, your schedule. So you can see how busy it is, the kind of people that are there, and it give you an idea of sort of the vibe at the time that you'll be there. You could go for a look around at 11:30 in the morning. Wouldn't necessarily give you a very good idea of how the gym is going to look a bit further down the line. Next up are cable machines. And now cable machines, you'll be able to identify relatively easily because they are a piece of equipment that are primarily operated via sort of cables and different attachments, handles and the likes on them. So you can have, a really big long handle if you want to use the cable machine to provide, yourself with seated pull downs. or they may have a smaller handle if you want to use it for an internal shoulder rotation. Or there may well be a Velcro cuff that you can put around your ankle if you want to use them for some lower leg exercises. There are a huge amount that we can do with a cable machine. And for triathletes, the most common exercise that I set with them are internal and external shoulder rotations, which target the rotator cuff. These can be targeted without a cable machine, but a cable machine is the best way to do it and the best way to get that stimulus that you're looking for within your training. So I do recommend that you go to a gym that has at least one, ideally two cable machines. They're often set up in sort of as a freestanding unit with four sides to them. And, often one will be reserved for, there'll be like a little bit of a bench for pull downs. And the other three will be a little bit more modular. I'm looking for at least one of these in a gym. Two would be ideal, but again, beggars can't be choosers. And we do need to be really mindful that that there are a lot of exercises that could be done with a cable machine, but that doesn't mean that we should. Again, they're very popular with bodybuilders because they allow you to really hyper focus on a single muscle. And that's just, not what we're looking to do as triathletes in most cases. There's a exception for everything and every rule. So, I'm not saying that that cable machines are rubbish. You shouldn't perform exercises on them. But what I am saying is, if possible, do look to perform exercises with free weights rather than using a cable machine. Just notice I'm 46 minutes in and I've only just finished covering equipment. Right, let's look into choosing a gym. So if you are looking at sort of a gym, there are generally speaking three types of gyms you can look at. There are budget gyms, and they can be really cheap, £15-20 a month maybe. They're often open 24/7. They've got very little in the way of staff presence there. They may not have showers, it depends on the gym itself. And the idea is that you turn up, you work out, you go home. They'd be playing dance music within the gym. They tend to be favoured more by bodybuilders, these sorts of gyms. They can be sort of sweat boxes. You do need to sort of be aware of the kind of people that are also going to be using that gym. Pay careful attention if you do go and have a look around if you're considering joining. Are these the kind of people who you want to spend time around with? And there's nothing inherently wrong with a budget gym. In fact, it could be a really good option for some triathletes, because if they're just looking to do one, maybe two strength sessions a week, they don't want to be spending money on a big fancy gym. Okay, they just want something that's going to be functional, they can go to for 30-45 minutes and go home. So don't discount these, but they wouldn't necessarily be my first choice, and you do have to be careful about them. Next up is a slightly nicer gym, what I might call sort of a regular gym. And the regular gym will often come with a pool attached. And it may have like a little cafe there as well, and it will be better served, have nicer changing rooms. The benefits for triathletes is if the pool is of a good length, then you can get all of your swimming done in this pool for the same price that you're also paying for a gym. So this can work out to be really economical. And again, as I said earlier, you could combine your swimming and your gym sessions on a day if you wanted to. So these can actually be a really good option for triathletes if there's one nearby that's at a reasonable price to you. There may not be anything else that's sort of super fancy or flashy about them. They may have sort of a sauna and a steam room and a few touches like that. But I would recommend having a look around. Don't discount these, especially if they have a nice pool attached to them. The final option is a health club or a premium gym, what I'd sort of refer to them as being. And these are very expensive. You're looking at, for a regular gym, as I've explained just now, you might be looking at about sort of £50-60 a month these days. You would be looking at kind of £120 plus a month for some of these expensive gyms. And I was a member of one for several years, mainly due to the fact that I could take clients in there. So I could get clients. I had permission to bring one in a month with a guest pass, and we could go do a swim session together. And that was a really nice way to kind of to earn somebody's trust, and to provide them with the help they needed. However, when it came to sort of value for money, it was really poor. Yes, it's nice to have an outdoor pool to swim in. Yes, it's nice to have two different types of steam room to choose from. And yeah, it's really lovely to have, all the equipment they have in the gym. But how much of that equipment did I actually use? Well, not an awful lot of it, because I mainly stuck to the bits of equipment that I've listed here. I didn't use the tennis courts. I didn't use the creche. Yeah, I did use the club room, and they had some nice meals that I bought from there if I was decided to work from the gym for a day. But was it really worth 3 times the cost of another gym? No, absolutely not. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you can get a discounted rate with like a corporate membership, if you may be a family and it works out quite well for you because that includes a creche, there are certain types of people for whom that would work well for. But the reality is that for most triathletes, you're only going to be going there. I mean, between swimming and strength, sort of 3 times a week, probably. Sometimes more, maybe. It depends on how dedicated you are. I mean, if somebody is sort of an elite triathlete, they might be there sort of 5 to 6 days a week. In which case, yes, maybe that would really work out well. But there are much better places for you to spend your hard-earned cash in the sport of triathlon than on a fancy gym, which functionally probably doesn't do anything much that a cheaper gym couldn't do. There are lots of other factors you have to consider when looking at a gym, such as location to you. If it's a choice. I mean, the reason that I inquired at that expensive gym to start with is because it was the closest one to me. And I figured it'd be much more likely, to go and to keep up the training that I was supposed to be doing if I only had to walk 10 minutes to get there, as opposed to having to get my bike out and cycle to the next gym. So again, that could be a justification in some cases for some people, but I really would, sort of try not to get drawn into sort of the sales piece of things. A lot of the gyms, they tend to they don't sell you the gym so much as sell you a new version of yourself, a new lifestyle. And it's an age-old sales tactic. And, a lot of people, they think, oh, I could really see myself here at this gym. It's really going to change who I am as a person. But the reality is that, a time will come when you realise, hang on a minute, my gym membership's come out again and I haven't been in however long because it's race season and I'm prioritising other things or whatever it could be. And they tend to have quite a high membership turnover as a result, these places. Next up, I'm going to be covering sets and reps. So this is something that, is really basic to some people, but not so much others. So when I am giving somebody a strength workout, I'm writing a training plan, it will be broken up into sets and reps. Now, a set is sort of one series of exercises. So if I'd say do a set of 12 reps, somebody will lift that weight 12 times and that would be a set. And I will also decide on how many sets it is that I want to give someone. So if we are in the off season, if we're just familiarising ourselves with the movements, chances are that doing sort of 3 sets of 10 or 12 is a pretty common way to do it. Because that way, if we're lifting something for 12 reps, it's got to be, it's not going to be super heavy. We're not going to be getting ourselves sort of in trouble, risking injury. We're just building up our sort of resilience, getting used to that injury, that exercise, reducing the risk of injury as such, and ensuring that we're building that foundation of strength that we need to hit a max strength block later. However, it could be that when we get to the max strength block that we go, okay, we're going to do 3 sets, but we're going to do 3 reps each. And those weights will be heavier as a result. Now I'm going to get into this in a bit more detail in next week's episode when we talk about how to progress and periodise your strength training. But that's a little bit of an insight into how to understand, when people talk about sets and reps. Now between each set we will have a rest period. And a lot of people who have come from CrossFit or some other areas of gym, they will be used to having longer rest periods because they will be coming really close to some sort of max effort, high velocity, high strength training within their gym work. And I've worked with people who come from this background, and we move into triathlon, and they go, "Oh, hang on a minute. Wait, I only get 60 seconds rest at the end of each set?" Well, yes, you do only really need 60 seconds rest most of the time because we're not pushing the body as hard. Now, if we are looking to do some explosive work such as jumps, or if we are lifting really heavy weights for 3 or 4 reps, then we will have a longer rest time. But for the most part, most triathletes, about a minute's rest between each set is probably all you really need. Now, that's not to say that you can't have less in certain situations. If you're just warming up or it's mobility exercise, you may not need that full minute. What I don't want people to do is people try to really squeeze in as much exercise as they can into a session but not giving themselves enough rest periods, because that can end up really backfiring, and you just don't get the quality of training that you would otherwise. Now, I was planning to include a big section where I go through all of the jargon that you can expect to encounter within the gym. However, you know what? I'm running out of time. I've nearly come up to an hour. This podcast could easily go on for 2 hours if it needed to. And honestly, I don't think many people are going to be that interested in listening to a 2-hour podcast about strength. So what I'm going to do is I do have a free introductory version of my strength and conditioning course. I'm going to stick that down in the show notes this week. So you get the first module, the strength and conditioning nuts and bolts, for free. And there is the whole strength training jargon area in there. So you can go through, you can understand strength training myths, learn about delayed onset muscle soreness, and how to balance it with swimming, cycling and running. All that information is there completely free for you. So I'll stick that down there in the show notes. The one bit I did want to cover though is gym etiquette. Now, when we're training in a gym, we do have to be conscious that we're most likely sharing the space with other people. And as a result, we need to, make sure that we're sort of following the broad social and expected norms in a shared space. So, the first one I want to sort of share with you is don't try to make conversation with someone who's wearing headphones. A lot of people go to the gym, and for them, this is a focused time for them to work on themselves. Now, there may be a really cute guy or girl that you see at the gym, and you think you might want to, strike up a little bit of conversation with them, see if you hit it off. Honestly, don't if they're wearing headphones. I mean, in these situations, if you think there is a little bit of a connection there, if sort of you find you sort of your eyes meet every now and then, smile at them, sort of give them a bit of a wave, sort of go to sort of walk past them, see if they like pull their headphone out, look at you. But what I don't want you to do, I don't want you to approach somebody, whether it's, whether you have any romantic sexual intentions or whether it's simply because you want to have a new friend. Don't go up and start a conversation with somebody with headphones on. That's really rude. Just give people some space when it comes to chit chat. There are a few examples where you may sort of have to sort of force the issue. For instance, if you have a question to ask them, if you really need to talk to them, then yes, that could be a good reason for it. But don't walk up to someone and ask them to take their headphones off just so that you can sit there and chat them up. That's not the done thing. Please always replace your weights after you finish using them. This is really basic, but everybody wants to be able to turn up to the gym and to be able to find all of the equipment in the place it should be, where it needs to be. Make sure that everything's in order, make sure that everything's put away specially. Don't just leave your equipment scattered around the gym as you go. That's really poor form, okay? So, make sure you rack all of your plates, all of your dumbbells, all the equipment that you use back to where it belongs after you finish with it. Speaking of equipment, don't take up more than your fair share of equipment. If you are thinking, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a superset where I'm going to be moving between, this bench over here with these dumbbells, and then going to go over to the squat rack, and then I'm going to go and do some squats off the back of it. You don't have the right to take up more than two pieces of equipment. If somebody wanders up to, if you were to wander up to a squat rack or a bench, you wouldn't expect somebody to shout at you, "Oh, I'm using that," from across the gym when they're physically not using it, okay? And if somebody tries to pull that on you, just say, "I'm sorry, this isn't your equipment. It's the gym's equipment. You're using that piece over there. And I'm entitled to use this," especially if it's busy. I mean, if there are other benches, then fair enough. It's not really worth the battle. Just go and use another bench. But if it's the only bench left, and somebody on the squat rack claims that they're using it, I would just use that bench and tell them to talk to the management if they've got an issue with it. The gym can be a sweaty place. So if you're using equipment, especially a bench that you're sat on or you're lying down on, give it a wipe down after you use it if you're a heavy sweater, or if you've sweated at all, I should say, really. Because what you don't want to do, you wouldn't want to walk up to a piece of equipment and find that it's covered in somebody else's sweat, would you? So don't leave your sweat on equipment. There should be plenty of spray bottles and paper towels around. Don't go nuts with the paper towels, but don't take more than you need. But just take 20-30 seconds to wipe down some equipment after you've used it if it is in a little bit of a state. Speaking of other people, make sure that you give them space as you move around them. If somebody is especially doing an exercise such as the bench press, where they may not be acutely aware of what's going on around them because they're looking up at the ceiling, or somebody's doing a sort of a more dynamic or explosive exercise, okay, make sure that you give everybody a good sort of 2-3 feet of clearance as you move around them, because some people can move quite unpredictably, especially if they have headphones on and they're not really aware of people in the space around them. You don't want to end up with weights dropped on your foot, or having a barbell ended up, in your rib cage because you didn't give somebody enough space. When you're training, don't drop weights unnecessarily. It's really not on. If you are, if you're grunting away, lifting a weight, and then you decide you're going to drop it for dramatic effect, and then walk around breathing hard with your hands on your hips. "Oh, look at me, I'm a big, strong man." Okay, don't get me wrong. Like, not many triathletes are going to sort of think and work like this, but it is pretty cringe when people do it, especially if it's an exercise such as a deadlift, where you're only actually 50% of the way through the exercise when you get to the top and you lock out. And if you're then dropping it, then you're dropping the weight from that position. You're just not getting the real benefit from the exercise, unless it's as part of a competition. So yeah, don't go dropping weights. The only exception is if you have to do so for health and safety. So if it is simply not safe, you don't have the strength to lower it down, or if it's from a place of an exercise such as an Olympic lift, where you end up with a weight above your head, and the only safe way to get out of that position is to drop the weight. Yeah, sometimes you have to do that, but try not to do it too much. And additionally, when it comes to sort of slamming, medicine balls and slam balls and the like, just be slightly conscious of people and that's going on around you. If there is sort of an exercise class going on in the next room, don't throw the ball against the wall. Just sort of things like this, where you're trying to limit the impact that your workout has on other people is a good way of, summarising that. When you're lifting, try not to grunt excessively. I get that it could be really hard, what it is that you're doing, but just try to keep it to a minimum. It's okay to breathe heavily, but if you are grunting for the sake of "look at me, look at how hard I'm working," people aren't into that. You're not really impressing anyone, and you're just imposing on other people's time in the gym, and they're not going to thank you for that. Now, if you're in the gym and you've been lifting for some time, and you understand how things work, don't give people unsolicited advice. Even myself, as a level 4 strength and conditioning coach, I don't give people unsolicited advice in the gym. I don't think I've ever gone up to anyone and said, "Oh, you're doing that wrong. You want to make sure that you do this," if somebody looked like they were really about to hurt themselves, then I'd probably step in and go, just want to let you know, if you do that, you could end up hurting your back. Sorry to interrupt, but I'd hate to see you get hurt. That's probably the only exception to that rule. People are out there, people are feeling self-conscious, people are learning. Okay, and don't give unsolicited advice. If somebody clearly looks like they're feeling lost and confused, are looking for a little bit of guidance, you could sort of walk past them and go, "Are you right there?" And if they go, I've just no idea how I'm supposed to do this," that's very different. But yeah, don't give people unsolicited advice. That's not really the way to go about things. On the gym floor, please don't walk in with muddy or wet shoes. If you do walk to the gym, make sure that you swap shoes if it is sort of wet outside. Make sure that you walk into the gym with clean shoes. I don't really want anyone to be walking around the gym leaving footprints behind them. It's not really very nice, not done thing. It's just creating work for the cleaners, okay? And unnecessarily. So make sure that you have sort of gym shoes that you're wearing, really. And speaking of sort of general standards in the gym, I know a lot of people will go to the gym first thing in the morning before they shower. But please throw on some deodorant if you know that you're prone to sweating, some antiperspirant, okay? It's not nice if you're in the gym and somebody is working next to you and you're getting a full nose of their BO, okay? Just take the time to apply a bit of deodorant before you go to the gym, okay? And everybody's going to really appreciate that. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I didn't come close to covering as much as I wanted to. I thought this would be the shorter episode, but I guess there's just an awful lot to cover. Strength and conditioning does feel a bit like a new sport. But yeah, do pop down into the show notes. There is a free copy of the first couple of modules of my Introduction to Strength and Conditioning course. And get stuck in there, start learning, and sort of get yourself up to speed with strength and conditioning, because this is the time of year to do this, okay? It's completely free, you've got nothing to lose. Thank you once again for your company. I'll see you all next week for the final episode in this trilogy, where I'm going to be discussing how it is that we progress our strength training and how we periodise our strength training throughout the year. Take care everyone, and I'll see you then.